Hey everybody, Jim McBride here, Charleston City Councilman District 3. This is part 3 of episode 11 series. Please go to part 1 and part 2 if you haven't seen those yet. The links will be in the description. And it kind of builds up to this part 3. So part 3 is how can we better synchronize growth and infrastructure on Johns and James Islands in District 3. So just review really quick. Part 1 talked about who our representatives are at the city, county, and state levels, who owns our roads, which is very important. Um, Part 2 is why has development population growth outpaced our infrastructure to support it? And now I'm talking about some ideas about what we can do to do better. So here are some 5 top extra categories that I'm using to answer this question. So the first thing that I recommend is what's called state concurrency laws. Okay, if we had concurrency laws in South Carolina all along over the last 30 years, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in now. And I'll explain why. So this is episode 11. Back in episode 5, back in May 1st of last year, I did a video on state concurrency laws. So the link will be in the description. You can click on that and watch that. I'll go over it briefly. I used 2 examples, one from Florida, and there's a link right here. You can go to that website to read more about how Florida does concurrency laws. But essentially, concurrency requires that public facilities and services needed to support development be available concurrent with the impacts of that development. So the infrastructure should be in place before the development happens or as it's happening, rather than an afterthought. This is how it seems around here lately, the last several decades. And here is a example of concurrency from Washington State, which has really, I think, really good concurrency laws. Again, I'm not a lawyer. These are just some examples that I found. So from Washington State, again, there's a website there you can go to, and one down at the bottom. But they have really good state concurrency law and municipal concurrency laws that are consistent with the state laws that are really good examples. But the way they define it is that the purpose of concurrency is to assure that those public facilities and services necessary to support development are adequate to serve that development at the time it is available for occupancy and use, without decreasing service levels below locally established minimum standards. Sounds common sense, doesn't it? But it hasn't been done around here for a long time. And again, and the state of South Carolina does not have concurrency laws. The good news is that several of our local Charleston and Johns Island state House representatives have proposed a bill for concurrency. 3 South Carolina State House representatives, Spencer Whitmore was the lead on it, Leon Stavronakis and James Teboul, and they all happen to overlap portions of Johns Island, their districts. If you go to part 1 of this episode 11, you'll see all about that. So they proposed concurrency legislation at the House, and a state senator also proposed concurrency legislation. Our House members initiated it, and the Senate side has responded. It doesn't mean it's going to pass this term, but it's gaining traction, and hopefully some form of concurrency laws will pass so that it'll force municipalities to ensure infrastructure is in place as development's happening. So that's great news, really great news. Okay, so number 2, centralizing the responsibility of what are currently state roads that are within city municipalities. That's a mouthful. What I'm just trying to say is that when you look at this map here, 1 second, all these red roads, this is from part 1 of this episode, all these red roads, this is Johns Island, this is James Island, there's the peninsula. The red roads are state-owned roads. It's mind-blowing. That's a lot. That's a lot of state-owned roads. It makes planning a city and development and zoning really difficult when growth starts happening within the city of Charleston, for example, but you're not in charge or responsible or have the funding mechanism to improve the roads within your city. Topic or part 2 of this series. Part 1 talks all about that. So go back to part 1, talk all about it, of how we started with this system back in the 1920s and been doing it ever since. And I argue that the state needs to pass a law that divests most of these state roads to the municipalities. And then they'd have to ensure they have the money to be able to take it on. And the municipalities, larger municipalities, not really small ones, but larger ones, because the really small ones can't afford necessarily to handle all their infrastructure. So it makes sense for the state to help them out. For larger municipalities like Charleston, I think should have responsibility for all these red roads, or most of these red roads, except for major highways or local highways. That would take time. It's not easy. You have to change the whole funding mechanism, the whole tax structure, and the municipalities would have to hire on workers, more road maintenance workers, more engineers, get more facilities, get equipment. It would take time. My argument is that if the state did it, passed a law and gave the municipalities 10 years to be able to ramp up to taking over those roads, that's plenty of time to figure out how to do it, both at the state level and the county level and the city level. Just an idea. But again, I just look at these number of roads and it just makes city planning and even county planning really, really difficult when so many of the roads within your jurisdiction you don't even control. It's pretty mind blowing. It's not the first time this has been thought of. The state has been trying to offer to give roads to the municipalities. This is at least from 2021, this article, SCDOT giving state roads to local governments, hoping to shrink the huge maintenance backlog. And maybe not surprisingly, a lot of the local governments didn't want to take on those roads. And that's why I argue there's got to be a statewide system that revamps this whole process. Because if the municipalities take on the roads, they have to take on, I think, all the roads, and the funding mechanism has to be changed. And again, they have to be able to have time to be able to ramp up to be able to do it. So it's not easy, but clearly the process we have in place now has not been working. At least in District 3, at least on Johns Island and James Island, it has not been working, and it is not working. So we've got to come up with something that's better, and that's my argument, and that's what I've proposed to some of the State House representatives. Okay, number 3, smarter, more proactive, and flexible municipal planning. So concurrency laws would help make a lot of that happen, but even with concurrency laws or until we get concurrency laws, municipalities should not allow this to happen. I talked about this in part 2 of this series, episode 11, part 2. Thankfully, the city is building a fire station right there in Maybank to increase their coverage. And thankfully, we've been safe. They've been protecting us very well, the city and St. John's Fire. But this is a huge gap in oversight and lack of investment, lack of proactive investment, in my opinion, in fire stations in a rapidly growing part of Charleston, particularly compared to the rest, or most of the rest. Up in Daniel Island, they're also not covered very well, and they are also getting some investments going right now, trying to find a new site for a fire station. So the city is responding now. My point is the last 10, 20 years, why was there not investment put in to ensure that there were new fire stations in place in some of these areas? It's unacceptable. It's getting fixed slowly but surely. Same thing with parks. Parks are less important than fire stations, obviously from a safety standpoint, but without recreational uh, facilities and places to go, people have to drive a long ways away. Kids can't just hop on their bike or walk from their neighborhood to get to a park. And it just makes logistics for parents and kids much harder and adds to traffic. Again, lack of forethought. But recently, the city has invested. We're starting to plan to build a recreation center, first recreation center on Johns Island, which will be right over by the current city park. Very exciting. And the city has also bought some land along Maybank for a future park use. So again, the last handful of years, they have started to try to make up for this, but we should never have been allowed to get to this situation. So that's just, if a city starts building faster than you expect in certain areas, that's what I mean by flexible, proactive, leading forward and responding to where rapid growth is happening and recognizing where shortfalls are compared to the rest of the city. That's just smart planning and leadership. Okay. Building moratoriums or moratoriums on building. Okay, that's a very controversial topic. I hear it all the time from a lot of folks. Why don't we just stop building? Mount Pleasant has done it with multifamily units. Other places have done it. Okay. This is a website, the only really kind of South Carolina specific website I could find that talks about moratoriums. It's Municipal Association of South Carolina. There's the link. I will put it in the description. It talks about South Carolina 1993 legal case called Simpkins versus the City of Gaffney, which addressed slowing or suspending rapid building growth in Gaffney, South Carolina. Implicit in the resulting Simpkins rule from that case is the idea that a moratorium is intended to allow the local town council, in this case, time to consider amendments or updates to the underlying zoning ordinance. So in other words, the moratorium was allowed as long as it was tied to the fact that they were looking to consider amendments or updates to their actual city ordinance for zoning. It was not simply just to stop development because they were growing too fast. Okay, so a leading case from Minnesota that the Municipal Association of South Carolina talks about that kind of lists more clearly how a moratorium could be legal provides that a moratorium is valid if it is for the purpose of researching and implementing changes to the zoning ordinance or comprehensive plan, which is similar to what the Simpkins rule says. It is of limited duration, so it can't be indefinitely. It's indefinite. It's got to be tied to a specific thing or time. And the local government acts promptly to research and implement such changes. So again, it's got to be tied. It's not legal to just stop building because growth is happening too fast. It's got to be tied to a specific municipal planning purpose. Okay. It sounds kind of restrictive. So why? Why is it so legally restrictive? Why can't the city or the county just stop building? The answer comes down to property rights. So think about it this way. All the land on really anywhere in the country, but all the land on Johns and James Islands, whether it's in the city, incorporated in the city, or unincorporated in the county, is already zoned and owned by somebody, by a person or an entity, business corporation, local government, or whatever. Okay. So somebody And there's families that invest in land. There's individuals that invest in land, and of course, there's bigger companies that invest in land. But it comes down to that they own that land. It's their land. It's their right to use that land. So that entity that bought that land with the understanding that they can use it in accordance with how it's zoned to be used in accordance with municipal laws that dictate the permitting process. So if they own the land and the land is zoned for business use or zoned for single family homes or multifamily homes or whatever it's zoned for, they have the right because they bought the land with their own money. They own the land. And that land can be used for the purposes that it was zoned for when they bought it. Quick caveat: they can request to change the zoning, but that's a process that has to come through the city council uh, to approve, or whatever, county council, whatever level of government that it's in. But otherwise, they have the right to use the land according to how it's zoned, in accordance with local permitting processes. So that's a guideline across the whole country. Um, again, because they have the right to use that land. So on Johns Island, most of the land that's bought and that can be developed into single family, multifamily homes, mostly single family, some businesses here and there. Sometimes there's mixed use. A lot of that land was bought and owned from the 1990s and sometimes earlier. And the developers are just waiting to build on it. And when I say developers, I'm not talking about necessarily big corporations. I'm also talking about families. And I know of a case of at least one family that owns some land bought over 20 years ago, and we're trying to find, save money and raise money to be able to eventually develop on it according to how it's zoned. It's a big family investment. Some other developers are very small business developers, and some are large, bigger corporations. Either way, property rights dictate that they have the right to develop that land according to how it's zoned. And a municipal government cannot just arbitrarily take away the rights of a property owner by preventing them from using the land they own, except in very unique circumstances, as I mentioned in the previous slide, and only for a limited time for a specific purpose as outlined by state and federal laws. But it can, and theoretically happen, and occasionally it does, obviously. You can Google South Carolina moratoriums. You'll see several around the state, a handful. One of the most recent is Mount Pleasant. There are many pros and cons to consider for even proposing a moratorium, and I am considering those pros and cons. Quick caveat here: I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a land attorney. I'm not a legal rights attorney. I'm not anything like that. Just a city council representative, former U.S. Marine. Done a lot of research on this, but I'm not speaking from a legal standpoint. I don't have the legal expertise other than just what I've learned on my own talking to legal experts. I want to make that clear. In episode or part, was it part 2 of this series of episode 11? I talked about, I think it was part 2. I just talked about the cost of owning and renting, or buying and renting any type of home anywhere in Charleston is astronomical. So one of the cons to a building moratorium is the local government artificially caps the supply or slows down the supply of homes, which based on supply and demand increases the price further. It makes it even harder for people to move to Charleston or to Johns Island. That's one con. In either case, I'm not dismissive of the idea. I am looking into it, trying to figure out if it's the right thing to bring up to city council. Okay, so that's that last topic. Make your voice heard at the local government, city, county, and state. And I can tell you, being on city council for a little over a year now, it matters. And over the year and 3 months or so I've been on city council, there has not been a lot of people from Johns Island who spoke at city council. It's only been less than one handful of people over the whole time. On my website, votejimmcbride.com, you can see a link on there as to how to sign up for public comments. But back to part one of this series and part two, you've learned, if you didn't already know, that so many of our infrastructure issues are really at the county and state level. And I have provided you some contacts and some information about your state representatives and county representatives. Make your voices heard to them as well. Okay, so here's your city representatives all in the area of District 3. There I am in the middle. There's my website. You can get a lot of information on. And there's the official website. And as I mentioned, Councilman Carl Brady up in District 5, West Ashley, Ross Appel, District 11, Councilwoman Parker, District 12, and James Island. If any issues are happening in any of those areas, please go to those websites and you can find out how to contact them. At the county level, we have District 8, Joe Boykin, District 9, Jenny Honeycutt. There are county council representatives. Again, if you look at part one of this series, you'll learn that the county has a role with the state for a lot of the funding mechanisms for our infrastructure issues, our road issues, flooding, etc. So contact them about that and other issues. At the state level, South Carolina State House Representatives, you have Spencer Wetmore, District 115. She's south of Maybank and over on James Island. You got James Teeple, newly elected District 116 on the western part of the city portion of Johns Island. And District 119, Leon Stavronakis, north of Maybank Highway, and all the way down to the airport. Again, we're fortunate to have 3 state house representatives that overlap Johns Island. Any average plot of land in the state of South Carolina has one representative, representative and one senator. We have 3 of each. We're very fortunate for that. We need to take advantage of that as local residents on Johns Island. Talk to our representatives, let them know some ideas and things that we're concerned about, see how they can help us. At the state Senate level, newly elected Ed Sutton, District 20, over on James Island part of District 3. District 41, Matt Lieber has a huge chunk of Johns Island in the city portion. And Margie Bright Matthews, District 45, down by the airport portion of Johns Island. Again, go to their websites and you can find out how to contact all of them. So that's it. Hopefully that helps and just shared some of my ideas. And I'm looking forward to hearing some feedback on this series of 3 videos. I hopefully it was helpful and kind of hit the mark as to some questions you had or things you wanted to know or things you needed to know, and arms you with information that can help your local government work better. I think it's starting to work better, in my opinion. I'm communicating at all levels with them very seamlessly. They're working on our behalf behind the scenes. I'm doing a lot of things behind the scenes. Mayor Cogswell as well, doing things behind the scenes to kind of catch up to what I consider poor execution of planning over the last 30 years on Johns and James Island. So hoping that things will continue to improve, but I can use your help. Let's try to arm you with this information. So thanks again, and God bless.